Hi, this is Dr. Zorba, Pastor, and I've got some comments about how we choose a Surgeon General. So first of all, the Surgeon Generals who have been chosen since the beginning of Surgeon Generals at all have been people with medical qualifications, not influencers from TikTok, not influencers from the blogosphere, not influencers from the left or right, people who actually have a degree in medicine, who have a scientific background and are basically going to use science to make their judgment. Now, I think this is really important. As you know, there's a lot of rubbish going around in Washington where people don't believe that vaccines help. Well, let's take smallpox, for instance. It killed 100 million people from around 1880 to around 1980. Once we had the smallpox vaccine for everyone, we got rid of smallpox completely. Let's look at the measles vaccine. Once we had the measles vaccine in this country, we'd get 20 to 40 cases a year. Now we've got roughly right now probably about 4,000 to 5,000 known cases of measles with a few deaths because we're not doing the measles vaccine. Soon we probably won't be doing the polio vaccine. Maybe tetanus will come back. Maybe diphtheria will come back. My mother in 1914 almost died of diphtheria. We've got a whole anti-vaccine crew out there that doesn't believe in vaccines. And one of the present people who are coming up in front of the Congress, which should do their job and actually decide in the Senate whether or not this person is qualified, does not answer any questions about vaccines. Asked a question, do you believe in vaccines? The answer is, well, let me tell you what I think. Asked a question, do you think that vaccines cause autism? Well, let me tell you what I really think. None of it, of course, is scientifically based. It's just as much rubbish as the idea that acetaminophen will actually cause autism during pregnancy. I think it's very, very important for us to get rid of the rubbish that's going on in Washington. I think it's very, very important for you as a listener to understand what the rubbish is about so you can help other people. And I'll give a really good example. I was in the office the other day with a young couple, very young couple, nice people, college educated. They had a child in there that was 6 months old and had not done any vaccines for their child. So I thought to myself, this is a good chance for me to kind of feel what's going on and see what I can do to change their mindset. Because that's my job. My job is to give them science. They're coming into the office for value. They're coming in for a well-child examination. So they're interested in what I have to say. So the first thing I said was, I want to tell you a little bit about vaccines, and I don't want you to get the vaccines today. That was my first setup. First of all, I knew they weren't going to get the vaccines today, but I really want to lower the tone so they're not thinking, oh, he wants to convince us to get the vaccines today. Let's lower the tone. So the first thing that came out, I said, why don't you get vaccines? I'm a doctor, scientist, I believe in vaccines. The mother of this particular child said, well, I've read that vaccines cause autism. And I said, well, let's talk a little bit about that. The issue is how autism is defined. If we look at what I call severe autism, a child that is mute, a child that does not interact, that does not talk to others, the serious autism on this whole scale, that hasn't changed as far as we know in the last 10, 20, 30, or 40 years. The definition of autism is what has changed. In other words, we are using it to describe a broader and broader group of people that are on the spectrum. And that's the reason for the supposed increase in autism. And so I think you have to think about that. And then she looked at me and she said, well, if we gave a few immunizations, what would you recommend? So I thought, okay, I just gave her some information that gave her an opening, and the husband, he was there too, to think about. He chimed in and said, I'd like to have that too. And I said, well, first of all, I would think about the Hib vaccine, HIB, which stands for Haemophilus influenza B. It's nothing to do with influenza. Long story, it's a bacterial infection that can cause meningitis. At the beginning of my practice, before the vaccine was invented, for the first 8 years of my practice, I saw 5 cases of meningitis from a Hib infection. All 5 children, many of whom I followed over time, lost IQ points from that. In other words, they all had some learning disabilities from the meningitis that they had. So I said, I would do the Hib vaccine first. Hib vaccine. Then she said, what about hepatitis B? And I said, well, you're not a Southeast Asian immigrant, which often has hepatitis B. People from Asia are more likely to have hepatitis B virus. That just happens to be the nature of it. I said, let's put that off to the side. I don't think that's as important as polio and MMR, because measles is all around. And of course, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus are also important. Why don't you think about starting out with this? But I'd look at the Hib vaccine first because you want to protect your child. So when it comes back to the Surgeon General, we want a Surgeon General who is science-based and not based on some cult that does not believe in science. This is Dr. Zorba, Pastor. Stay well.